What if I told you the crisis facing the US dollar isn't just inflation? It's not even a recession. It's something far worse. Something that's happened twice before in history. And both times, it didn't just destroy money. It destroyed entire civilizations. Currency death and imperial collapse, happening simultaneously. And the year we need to watch? 2026. Let that sink in for a moment. Picture Germany. November 1923. A worker gets his paycheck Friday morning. 4 hours later, that same paycheck can't buy a loaf of bread. Prices doubled during his lunch break. His wife takes paper money, worthless cash, and burns it in the stove. Not because she's insane, because the bills are cheaper than firewood. That's what hyperinflation looks like. Money becomes trash. Literally. A student orders coffee at a cafe, 5,000 marks. He drinks it. Orders a second cup, 7,000 marks. That's not over a week. That's 20 minutes. Now picture Rome, 476 AD, the empire that ruled the known world for 1,000 years. Their silver coins used to be 98% pure. By the end, less than 5%. Basically copper painted to look valuable. Soldiers aren't getting paid. Citizens don't trust the money. Emperor Diocletian tries to fix it. Makes inflation illegal. Death penalty for charging too much. Guess what? Doesn't work. Merchants stop selling. Farmers hoard grain. Cities starve. And then the whole thing just falls. Not conquered by barbarians. Collapsed from within. Economic rot killed Rome before any army did. Two disasters. Different speeds. Weimar burned in months. Rome rotted over centuries. Here's what makes 2026 so terrifying. America's facing both at the exact same time. Weimar's speed of monetary collapse. Rome's scale of imperial decline. Combined. Think about what that means. Not just an economic crisis, a civilizational crisis. The kind that ends empires. The kind that rewrites history books. And the warning signs? They're flashing red right now. Think about what that means for your life. You've been building your 401k for 20 years. You wake up Tuesday morning. Half of it's gone. Not because the market crashed. Because the dollars in it are worth half as much. 2 decades of savings. Erased overnight. You need groceries. Eggs cost $6 last week. This week, $18. Your paycheck hits Friday. By Saturday morning, it buys 30% less. Your landlord raises rent because his costs are exploding. You can't keep up. You think, I'll sell my house, get out while I can. But nobody's buying. Mortgages hit 9% interest. The market's frozen solid. That equity you spent 15 years building, gone. Evaporated. And your bank? The one you've trusted for a decade? Sign on the door Tuesday morning. Temporarily closed. It's not temporary. They're never reopening. Your money's in there. You can't touch it. This isn't fear-mongering. This is pattern recognition, and the patterns are screaming. The same debt trap that destroyed Weimar. The same currency debasement that toppled Rome. The same political chaos. The same social unraveling. It's all happening in America right now. Not in theory, in reality. In public data, anyone can verify. Sound familiar? It should. Let me show you exactly how this happens. First, you need to understand what killed Weimar Germany. Not the war, not the treaty, the debt. Rewind the clock to 1914. Look at Germany before the first shot was fired. This wasn't a failing state. It was a powerhouse. Their currency, the mark, was solid as a rock. It was backed by gold. It was stable. It was respected in every banking hall across Europe. German industry was the envy of the world. Then the guns of August fire. World War I begins, and Germany makes a fatal financial decision. A decision that would haunt them long after the fighting stopped. They decide not to raise taxes to pay for the war. Instead, they borrow everything. They sell bonds to their own citizens. They unhook their currency from gold. They start printing money, weapons, uniforms, food for millions of soldiers. It's all paid for with credit and fresh ink. The plan? It was seductively simple. Win the war. Conquer Europe. Seize the resources of the defeated nations. And make the losers pay for everything. The Allies will cover the tab. It was a gamble of epic proportions. Except they lost. Sound familiar? Borrow now, pay later. Bet everything on one specific outcome. Hope for the best. November 1918. Germany surrenders. The gamble fails, and the bill comes due. The Treaty of Versailles comes down like a hammer. The victors don't just want peace, they want payment. War reparations are set at 132 billion gold marks. In today's money, that is roughly $442 billion. It was a debt load designed to be unpayable. The Weimar government looks at this mountain of obligation and panics. They can't raise enough taxes from a broken population. They don't have the gold reserves because they spent them on the war. They have massive domestic war debts, plus these massive foreign penalties. So they face a choice: default and face invasion, austerity and face revolution, or the third option. Here's what they do. What governments always do when they are backed into a corner. They choose the printing press. It is the politician's favorite drug. Immediate relief. Delayed consequences. They start printing money to buy foreign currency to pay their debts. At first, it seems manageable. We'll print a little. Stimulate the economy, keep the workers employed, inflate away some of the domestic debt. It'll work out. That's what every central banker in history has told themselves right before the disaster. 1919 arrives. Inflation hits 50%. It is painful, but survivable. People grumble at the beer halls. Prices are up, but life goes on. 1920. Inflation hits 100%. It's getting worse. Savings don't stretch as far as they used to, but people adapt. They cut back. It's not catastrophic yet. 1921. Prices are now up 300% from before the war. Now people notice. Now the panic starts to set in. Their money is losing value fast. But the government says it's temporary. They have excuses. Blame the Treaty of Versailles. Blame the French occupation of the Ruhr. Blame greedy speculators. They blame everything except the printing press running in the basement. Then 1922 hits, and something breaks. Psychology shifts. Trust evaporates. By July 1922, prices jump 700% in a single year. The exchange rate goes from 4 marks per dollar to 320, then 7,400. Then the numbers stop making sense to the human mind. The Reichsbank is now running printing presses 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, round the clock. They actually hire private printing firms to help because the government presses can't keep up. Here's the trap: the death spiral. They print money to pay debts. More money in the system means each mark is worth less. So to pay the same amount of debt, they need to print even more marks, which makes each mark worth even less, which means they need to print even more. It is a feedback loop from hell, and there is no exit, no off switch. Once this dynamic starts, it accelerates exponentially. By late 1923, the numbers become almost incomprehensible. Mathematical absurdity becomes daily reality. $1 equals 4.2 trillion marks. Let me repeat that. 4.2 trillion marks for a single dollar. A loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. 200 billion for bread. Prices aren't rising by the year or the month. They are doubling every 2 days. A woman goes shopping on Monday. Eggs cost 50,000 marks. She thinks that's too expensive. She comes back Wednesday. Same eggs. 200,000 marks. Same farmer. Same eggs. 4 times the price in 48 hours. That coffee example I mentioned earlier, that is a real story from a waiter in Berlin. 5,000 marks when the customer ordered. 7,000 marks when he finished the cup. The student sat there for 20 minutes. Prices jumped 40% while he was simply drinking his coffee. Think about that. Think about how you function in a world like that. You don't. Workers get paid twice daily now, morning and lunch. Because if you wait until the evening whistle to get paid, your wages are worthless. You physically run to the nearest store to buy anything. Soap. Sausage. Choose. Anything that is real. You've seen the photos in history books, but really look at them. Women pushing wheelbarrows piled high with cash. They aren't going to the bank. They are going to the bakery. A wheelbarrow of cash to buy a single chicken. 1 chicken. People stop using marks entirely. They revert to the primitive. They barter. They trade goods for goods. A farmer wants tools. He won't take paper. A baker wants shoes for his children, not cash. The monetary system just stops functioning. Money stops being money. And here's what people don't understand about hyperinflation. This isn't just inconvenient. This destroys civilization. Modern economies run on money. They run on trust. On the shared belief that a piece of paper has value and can store your labor. When that belief dies, everything dies. Here's where it gets truly unsettling. This isn't just an economic crisis. It is a social catastrophe. The middle class is wiped out. Teachers, doctors, shopkeepers, civil servants. These were the people who played by the rules. They had savings, life insurance, war bonds, pension plans. all denominated in marks, all worthless overnight. A lifetime of hard work, erased. A widow who sold her husband's business for enough money to retire in comfort now can't buy a subway ticket with the proceeds. Riots break out in the cities. Hungry crowds storm the countryside. Farmers won't sell food for worthless paper, so people come to take it by force. Crime explodes. Morality collapses. Women turn to prostitution, not by choice, but because it is the only way to feed their children. Families disintegrate under the stress. Suicides spike. The social contract is torn to shreds. And in this chaos, in this vacuum of hope, political extremism surges. The communists are in the streets promising revolution. The fascists are in the beer halls promising order. And desperate, broken people start to listen. November 1923. The height of the madness. A failed artist named Adolf Hitler stands in a Munich beer hall. He fires a pistol into the ceiling. He gives speeches that tap into the rage. He blames everyone. He blames the Weimar government. He blames the Treaty of Versailles. He blames the Jews. He blames the communists. He blames the bankers. He creates a narrative of betrayal and Germans who just lost everything, who watched their life savings become kindling for the stove, who saw their children go hungry in a modern nation. They listen. Hitler attempts a coup that November. It fails. He gets arrested. He goes to jail. But the seeds are planted deep in the German psyche. The trauma of 1923 never leaves them. 10 years later, when the Great Depression hits, those same desperate Germans remember the chaos of democracy, and they vote the Nazis into power. The hyperinflation didn't just destroy money, it destroyed faith in democracy. It paved the way for dictatorship, for World War II, for the Holocaust. This is what happens when a currency dies. It is not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It is about the end of a civilization. And here's the critical insight most people miss about this era. We look at the stock market crash in 1929 as the great disaster. But in Germany, the crash wasn't the catastrophe. The debt was. The decision to print money to pay unpayable obligations. That was the catastrophe. Sound familiar? Because America is doing the exact same thing right now. Now let's jump to 476 AD. Different era. Different speed. Same result. Ancient Rome. The 2nd century. The peak of human civilization. The Roman denarius was the dollar of its day, the reserve currency of the known world, trusted from Britain to Egypt. It was 98% pure silver, solid, real. But over the next 200 years, they didn't just spend it, they destroyed it. Not through war, not through conquest, but through the exact same mechanism we just saw in Germany. Currency debasement, fiscal irresponsibility, short-term thinking. Here's what happens. Running an empire is expensive. You have legions stationed on 3 continents. You have roads to build, aqueducts to maintain, and you have bread and circuses, free grain and entertainment to keep the angry mobs happy. It costs more every single year, but tax revenue isn't keeping up. The emperors face a choice: cut spending and risk a coup, or cheat. They cheat. They take the denarius, that 98% pure silver coin, and they send it back to the mint. They mix in copper. They mix in bronze. They dilute the silver content. Now they can mint more coins from the same amount of silver. It feels like magic. Free money, right? Wrong. At first, the change is subtle. 98% drops to 90%, then 85%. Citizens barely notice. A coin is a coin, right? But it accelerates. It always accelerates. By the 3rd century, the denarius is less than 5% silver. It is basically a copper slug dipped in a silver wash. Everyone knows it's fake. The trust collapses. Prices start rising. In the early empire, inflation was maybe 1% a year, stable. By the late 3rd century, it hits 30% annual inflation. For the ancient world, without high-speed trading, that is hyperinflation. Citizens can't afford basic goods. Soldiers demand higher pay because their coins are worthless. The economy starts falling apart. Enter Emperor Diocletian in the year 301 AD. He decides to fix it, but he doesn't fix the money. He tries to fix the prices. He issues the Edict on Maximum Prices. It is a government command setting legal price limits on over 1,000 items. Bread, wine, labor, shipping. Everything has a price ceiling. And the penalty for charging more than the legal price? Death. He blames the merchants. He calls them profiteers, speculators, enemies of the state. Sound familiar? Here's what happens when you make it illegal to sell goods at their real market price. Merchants stop selling. Why would a farmer sell grain if the legal price is lower than the cost to grow it? He wouldn't. He hoards it. He feeds it to his pigs, or he sells it on the black market. Goods vanish from the shelves. Shortages explode. The economy goes underground. Barter replaces currency because the currency is a lie and the official prices are a death trap. The government eventually has to collect taxes in wheat and livestock because their own money is worthless. This economic rot spreads to everything. The military struggles. Soldiers go unpaid or are paid in trash currency. They lose loyalty to Rome and sell loyalty to their generals. Barbarian invasions increase because the defense budget is broken. Political chaos follows. Between 235 and 284 AD, a span of 50 years, Rome has over 50 emperors. Think about that stability. Most were assassinated. The throne became a death sentence. Citizens lose faith. They stop paying taxes. They stop joining the legions. The empire fragments. East versus West. The center cannot hold. 410 AD. The Visigoths sack Rome, the eternal city, looted for the first time in 800 years. 476 AD. The last Western emperor. A teenager named Romulus Augustulus. He is deposed by a barbarian warlord. Western Rome ends. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whimper. An empire that ruled the world for 1,000 years just fades away. Historians look back at this. They trace the collapse. It wasn't just the barbarians at the gate. It started with the debasement of the currency. It started with funding today's luxury with tomorrow's crisis. It started with the choice between painful reform and easy money. They chose easy money. The historian Will Durant said it best. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within. Rome's lesson isn't about swords and shields. It's about economic rot, currency fraud, fiscal collapse, political paralysis. Sound familiar? Because here is the terrifying convergence. This is the point of this entire video. America in 2026 isn't just facing one of these disasters. We are showing the patterns of both. Weimar's debt trap and rapid money printing. Rome's imperial overreach and slow currency decay. Simultaneously, we are combining the speed of 1923 with the scale of 476. Let me show you the numbers. These aren't predictions. These are facts sitting in public databases right now. U.S. federal debt is over $35 trillion as of 2024. It is growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Not a year, not a quarter. Every 100 days, another $1 trillion is added to the pile. Our debt to GDP ratio has crossed 120%. That is higher than at any time in our history except for World War II. But here is the difference. In World War II, we were fighting the Nazis. We were building a war machine to save the world. What are we fighting now? Nothing. We are just spending. Pop quiz. What happens when you borrow $1 trillion every 100 days forever? You can't. It is mathematically impossible. At some point, the math takes over. Something breaks. The only question is when. Here's where it gets insane. Look at where your tax dollars are actually going. In the first 7 months of fiscal 2024, the U.S. government paid $514 billion in interest on that debt. That is dead money. That buys no bridges, no schools, no health care. It is money paying for past mistakes. Now compare that to what we spent on national defense in the same period, $498 billion. Read that again. We are now paying bondholders more than we pay our soldiers. We are spending more on interest than on the entire U.S. military machine. That is not sustainable. That is not even rational. That is Rome, paying for yesterday's empire while today's empire crumbles. And it's accelerating. Every rate hike makes the interest payments higher. Every trillion in new debt adds more fuel to the fire. It is a trap with no exit. We can't afford to service the debt we have, but we can't stop borrowing because the whole system depends on new money flowing in to pay off the old money. Sound familiar? It is the Weimar spiral. Different scale, same mechanics. So what does the Federal Reserve do? Picture yourself as the chairman of the Fed. You walk into your office. You look at the data, and you realize you are trapped. Let me show you the trap. Option 1. You raise interest rates to fight inflation. That is the textbook move. That is what Paul Volcker did in 1980. He jacked rates up to 20%. He crushed the economy to save the dollar. It was a painful recession, but it worked. Inflation died, and the economy eventually boomed. Except we can't do that now. In 1980, debt was 30% of GDP. Today, it is 120%. Every percentage point increase in rates adds hundreds of billions to our annual deficit. If the Fed raises rates like Volcker did, the US government goes bankrupt. The interest payments would consume every single tax dollar collected. Social Security? Gone. Military budget? Gone. Medicare? Gone. It's all eaten by interest. And it's not just the government. Banks fail. We saw that in 2023, when 3 major regional banks collapsed just because rates ticked up slightly. Corporations that borrowed cheap money can't refinance. They go under. Mass layoffs begin. Asset prices crash. That is 1929. A deflationary debt spiral that wipes out the economy. So you look at option 2. Cut rates, print money, yield curve control. Bail everyone out. Keep the system liquid. That's what they did in 2008. That's what they did in 2020. Flood the economy with new dollars to paper over the problems. Except now, we have supply problems. We have deglobalization. We have trade wars. We are reshoring production at 5 times the cost of making it in China. When you print trillions of new dollars and pour them into an economy with fewer goods to buy, prices explode. That is Weimar. That is hyperinflation. This is the checkmate position. Raise rates, you trigger a Great Depression. Print money, you trigger hyperinflation. Every move makes something worse. There is no good option. There is only bad and catastrophic. And here's what people don't understand. They are waiting for the crisis to start. But for the bottom half of America, the depression is already here. The politicians point to the official unemployment rate, 4%. It sounds great, until you realize how they count it. If you lose your career and drive for DoorDash for 2 hours a week, you are fully employed. If you give up looking for work because there are no jobs, you aren't unemployed anymore. You just disappear from the data. Real underemployment is way higher. Look at the streets. Over 650,000 Americans are homeless right now. That is the highest number ever recorded in our history. Food bank usage is at pandemic levels. But there is no pandemic. There is no lockdown. Just economic desperation. 1 in 7 Americans relied on food assistance last year. Look at real wages. When you adjust for the actual cost of living, not the government's watered-down CPI, wages are down. You are working the same hours, maybe more, but you can afford less than you could 4 years ago. This isn't coming. It's here. The stock market is celebrating. CNBC is cheering about record highs. But Main Street? Main Street is drowning. And when Wall Street finally catches down to where Main Street already is, the collision is going to be violent. Meanwhile, the dollar is losing its crown. For 70 years, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. It is an exorbitant privilege. It lets us print money that other countries have to hold. It lets us run deficits that would destroy any other nation. They buy our bonds. They fund our spending. But that era is ending. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are building payment systems to bypass the dollar. China is cutting its holdings of US debt. Saudi Arabia is openly discussing selling oil in yuan. IMF data shows dollar reserves declining globally. Central banks are buying gold at a record pace to replace dollars. When foreigners stop funding our deficits, we have 2 choices. Default, which is unthinkable because it crashes the global financial system, or print the money ourselves to replace the foreign buyers. That is called debt monetization. That is the Weimar playbook word for word. Sound familiar? Because we are watching it happen in real time. So when does this bomb actually detonate? Is it 10 years away? Is it a slow decline? No. There is a specific trigger, and it has a date attached to it. Between 2020 and 2021, something extraordinary happened in corporate America. Interest rates were crashed to near zero. It was free money. Corporations went on the biggest borrowing binge in human history. They issued trillions in bonds. They took out massive loans. They locked in those rates for 5 to 7 years. It seemed like genius at the time. They used the money for stock buybacks. They acquired competitors. They paid massive dividends. It was a party. But do the math. 5 to 7 years from 2020 brings us to a very specific window, 2025 and 2026. Over $2 trillion in corporate debt comes due in that window. It hits a maturity wall. It needs to be refinanced. The bill comes due, except rates aren't 2% anymore. They are 7%, 8%. Maybe higher for risky companies. Here's what that means in practice. Imagine a company borrowed $1 billion at 2%. Their annual interest payment was $20 million. Manageable. Now, in 2026, they have to refinance that debt at 8%. Their annual payment jumps to $80 million. Where does that extra $60 million come from? It doesn't exist. They don't have it. Profits haven't quadrupled. So what happens? The company defaults. or it enters survival mode. It fires everyone. It cuts all investment. It sells assets. Moody's estimates that roughly 1/3 of publicly traded companies are zombie companies. They don't generate enough profit to cover interest payments at current rates. They are the walking dead, surviving only because cheap money kept them on life support. When the refinancing wall hits in 2026, they fall. Mass layoffs follow corporate defaults as surely as thunder follows lightning. Unemployment spikes. Consumer spending collapses because no one has a paycheck. That is the trigger. It's not a prediction of doom. It is a mathematical certainty built into the loan contracts that already exist. It is on the calendar. We can see it coming. Now picture the cascade. 2026 arrives. The maturity wall hits. Corporate defaults trigger mass layoffs. Unemployment jumps to 8%, 10%, maybe higher. People lose their jobs, so they can't pay their mortgages. They can't pay their credit cards. They can't pay their car loans. The banks holding those loans start to fail. The financial system freezes. The Fed panics. They pivot. They slash rates to zero. They print trillions of dollars to bail out the system. They try to inflate the debt away. But we still have supply constraints. We still have deglobalization. We still have broken supply chains. All that new money floods into the economy, but there are fewer goods to buy. Prices explode. Food, energy, essentials. Everything soars. Imagine being unemployed because of the depression part, but eggs cost $20 a dozen because of the inflation part. Your savings are worthless. Your job is gone. The purchasing power of any money you do have evaporates daily. Weimar's hyperinflation, Rome's imperial collapse, happening simultaneously. That is the convergence. That is what makes 2026 different from every crisis in American history. We have had recessions before. We have had inflation before, but we have never faced both at this magnitude at the same time. This isn't a distant threat. This isn't maybe in a decade. The machinery is in motion right now. The fuses are lit. The calendar doesn't care if you are ready. The trap is set. Let's talk about your money. You have probably been told the golden rule of investing. 60% stocks, 40% bonds. The balanced portfolio. It is the safety net that financial advisors have been selling for decades. Safe, diversified, responsible. And the theory works. Stocks provide growth during the good times. Bonds provide safety during the crashes. When one zigs, the other zags. It worked beautifully for 40 years. But there is a catch. It was designed for a world where we face either inflation or recession, never both. In a stagflation depression, the 60-40 portfolio becomes a trap. There is no exit. Your stocks get crushed because of the depression component. When unemployment surges and people stop spending, corporate earnings collapse. The S&P 500 lost nearly 90% of its value between 1929 and 1932. Even in the milder crisis of 2008, stocks fell over 50%. That is your 60% allocation gone. Normally, this is when your bonds save you. Historically, when stocks crash, investors flee to the safety of treasury bonds, driving their prices up. But in a high inflation environment, bonds are poison. Think about it. A bond paying 3% interest while inflation runs at 8%, you are losing 5% of your purchasing power every single year. Guaranteed. Nobody wants to hold an asset that bleeds value, so bond prices collapse. During the 1970s stagflation, long-term treasuries lost over 40% of their real value. Do the math. Your stocks are down 40% or more. Your bonds are down 30% or more. Your safe, balanced portfolio just lost a third of its value. And there is nothing inside it protecting you. Both assets are burning simultaneously. This isn't theoretical. It already happened in 2022. Stocks and bonds fell together for the first time in decades. That was just a preview of what a true stagflation depression does to traditional paper assets. So what survives? What stands tall when paper assets burn from both directions? Here is the principle you need to understand. You need assets that are scarce, and you need assets that are essential. Scarcity protects you against inflation because they can't print more of it. Essentiality protects you against depression because people never stop needing it. Precious metals check both boxes, gold and silver. You can't print them. You can't hack them. They have no counterparty risk. The World Gold Council reports that central banks bought record amounts of gold in 2024 and 2025. Think about that. When the people who print the money are hoarding gold, that tells you everything you need to know about their faith in their own paper. Productive real estate checks both boxes, especially farmland. We can't manufacture more land, and people will always need to eat. In the depths of the Great Depression, farms that produced actual food held their value while speculative urban properties went to zero. Energy assets check both boxes: oil, gas, uranium. Civilization runs on energy. We might want to transition to green energy, but that takes decades. In the crisis of 2026, the world will still run on hydrocarbons. Companies with actual reserves in the ground own something real that doesn't depend on financial engineering. The common thread is tangibility. These assets exist outside the financial system. Their value doesn't require you to trust the Federal Reserve. It doesn't require you to trust the solvency of a bank. Now, hear me clearly. This doesn't mean you sell everything today and buy gold bars to bury in your backyard. That's crazy. Diversification still matters. Liquidity still matters. Your specific situation, your debts, your income stability, your time horizon, these must inform your strategy. But the strategic shift is clear. The 40-year era that rewarded paper assets and financial engineering is ending. The era that rewards tangible value and real production is beginning. You have to adapt, or you will get left behind. So what do you do right now? 3 things. First, stay informed. Watch the inflation numbers, not the stock market. Watch the bond yields. Watch the central bank purchases. Informed people make calm decisions. Unaware people panic. Second, protect your purchasing power. Consider hard assets. The percentage depends on your risk tolerance. But having zero exposure to things that can't be printed is a risk you can no longer afford. Third, prepare mentally. Build an emergency fund, but keep it accessible. Know what expenses you can cut if the storm hits. Mental preparation matters just as much as financial preparation. Don't panic. Plan. Here is the final truth. This isn't inevitable. We haven't crossed the Rubicon yet. Germany recovered after Weimar. They issued a new currency, stopped the printing, and rebuilt. Eastern Rome reformed its money and lasted another 1,000 years. The question is whether we learn from history or repeat it. Whether we demand fiscal sanity or keep pretending the debt doesn't matter. Whether we face reality now or let the crisis force our hand later. You are receiving this information before the wall hits, before the refinancing crisis of 2026, before most people understand what is coming. Previous generations learned these lessons through losses. You have the opportunity to learn them through awareness. That is your advantage. Consider this video your map. The terrain ahead is unfamiliar, but it is not unnavigable. Americans survived 1929. Civilizations recovered from Rome's fall. We will too. But only if we see clearly, only if we adapt honestly, only if we prepare now. The dollar isn't dead yet, but it is dying. You know that now. You've seen the patterns. You understand the trap. Use that knowledge.